Welcome to the Empower Now podcast. It's your host, Reggie White, and I cannot believe we're here, but we're at the season finale of season 2. I got a phenomenal guest on the line here with me that I'll introduce in a moment, but we're going to first start with a prayer. If you've been joining us throughout this season, last season, know that something special is coming our way. Things in momentum is building, and I'm really excited for all the stories that has been told on this podcast and the stories that's to come. We're going to focus on this prayer first, and then we're going to dive into our contact here on the line, Mr. Brandon Sales or Dr. Sales. So we'll get that going and start with this prayer. So please bow with me if you can. Lord, I'm thankful and grateful for the call that you've been giving me to answer and the call that you've been helping others to realize that they can answer. Father, we've been talking about this concept of purpose all throughout the second half of season 2. And I pray that this can be that culmination moment that can be able to help others know what it truly means to tie passion to purpose. I thank you for all that you're doing. I thank you for all that you are. And I'm thank you for helping us to know when we can see ourselves for who we truly are, the way you see us, that there's nothing that we can't do as long as Christ is in us. So Lord, I pray that you can be able to help remove anything out the atmosphere, any fear, any doubt, any anxiety, anything that could be a distraction from us fulfilling our purpose. Help us to be able to be motivating, help us to be able to be captivating, help us to be able to bring somebody to you in a different way by just hearing the story of this young man, Brandon Sales. Lord, I thank you for him being obedient to be able to be on here. I thank you for me being able to have the ability to host this. And I just pray this can be really impactful and motivational for somebody so they can be able to know that all it takes is one yes to change their life. That somebody could be one yes away for something being able to be taken off and captivated and changing for the rest of their life. And that's my prayer for this to be from this episode, that somebody can be able to finally say yes to that call to achieve their purpose that you have in their life. I thank you for all that you're doing, all that you are, and I know this is going to be impactful. In your name I pray. Amen. All right. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sales, Brandon Sales. This is somebody I've always had high respect for, and I definitely felt like there were times me and him had a whole bunch of conversations in college where there was times he was talking to me and I was like, I don't know if in my mind, I was like, I don't know if I've arrived yet. I don't feel like I'm as great as this guy says I am, but I am really grateful for Brandon taking the time to spend with us on this episode, and I'm going to turn it over to him to introduce himself. So Brandon, you got the floor, man.
Absolutely. Thank you, Reggie. I really appreciate you extending your platform to me. For those that don't know, I'm Brandon Sales. I'm 2015 A&T grad, mechanical engineering. Left A&T, went on to Purdue, did my master's, PhD. I enjoy life from the Eastern Shore of Maryland, country boy. So I like to move. I love to travel. I like to do all these things. But at the end of the day, I really enjoy just being able to touch lives. And so I really appreciate being on this podcast right now to be able to share my story.
Thank you so much for that, Brandon. So just to kind of give those that may not have been tapped into the season some context, the second half of season 2, we've been really focusing on this series called Tie Passion to Purpose. And we've been really challenging the listeners to think about what it means to truly align purpose to a passion that can be able to fuel you to your future. Brandon, where I want to start first, because you get this more than anybody else of what it means to go after something, but then the body of work it takes to get there. When you think about the question, what is my life's purpose? Like, how do you put that into a reality of saying, this is one thing to dream it, but it's another thing to do it? So like, I would ask, kind of talk to the listeners about what that looked like for you as you were kind of exiting high school and to taking you to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would like to start with the fact that I didn't even know coming out of high school what an internship was. So thinking about where I am now, having a PhD, and then let's say 10, 12 years ago, I didn't even know what an internship was. And so coming out of high school, I had to get a lot of scholarship money because being out of state, we all know how financial aid office is at any institution, let alone A&T. So that internship money really helped me get there. And so being able to start there with the fact that, okay, one domino is here, let me get to the next. It's always trying to add on to the next step so that I can finish out this process. And it took so much time because we never know how life is going to play out. And so we're just okay, one semester at a time, one day at a time, one assignment at a time. But even in that, it's like hard to wrap your head around like where you're going to be. And thankfully, like you said in the intro, like I kind of had an idea what I wanted to do. And I came to A&T, I wanted to do aerospace engineering, and A&T had some sort of version of that. And so I was like, okay, I want to do that. I want to design planes. I want to make sure that people like us could go anywhere we need by flight. And I want to be about that business. And so I'm like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go to the number one producing HBCUs for Black engineers. I'm like, okay, all right, I'm at A&T. Now what? Because I was paying my way through, like I had no room for error. And so I was like, okay, every semester I had to be on it, because if I were to slip, then the dream wasn't going to happen. And that's a lot of pressure to put on, 17, 18-year-old kid that really doesn't know much about the world. He's 6 hours away from home, and you never know what could happen. And then, with people, they find that their first semester is like that rowdy, you get off track, or you find ways to, get yourself in trouble because you're first exposure to freedom, you're out of your parents' eyes, and so you do all you want. But that didn't happen for me. And, spoiler alert, that actually happened in grad school for me, where my first semester I was just all over the place. But to get from A&T semester by semester to now, it just took a lot. And like I said earlier, you never know how this could go. And you meet so many people that help you along the way. And you have these conversations about people, with people, and about what you want to do. And you keep telling them so that in some way you're held accountable. Because if you tell people your dreams, they remember and they say, hey, aren't you thinking about doing this? And even if you change your mind, that's fine, but at least someone's there to be like, hey, I see you still doing that. That's what's up. And it's something where you have to take it serious. And even on the days where we play around, that's fine. But at the end of it, you have to make sure that you're back on track. It just takes a lot of focus. So much focus, Reggie.
Man, I only can imagine, because like when you think about it, and we talked about this before we started recording this, but the level got higher, and the expectation, well, not even expectation, the challenges got to a whole nother spectrum when you think about the schools you went to for undergrad versus graduate school versus your doctorate. Like, it's a different level. Talk to me about growing up through that. When you think about like a young man to manhood and having to really make that happen, like talk to that young, not necessarily you, but maybe somebody could be listening to this and could be saying, I want to do this, but man, I have a full appreciation of what it takes. Can you give perspective of the hours, the blood, the sweat, the tears, the context of what that feels like?
Absolutely, because to be honest, I knew a PhD is what I wanted, like personally. Like professionally, it helps, but personally, I wanted to get there. But I was like, okay, let me get a master's, because that's all my professional area was calling for. It's like, okay, get a master's and then you'll be set. So having a PhD is not necessary in all fields. Now, it's great to be an aerospace engineer and to know aircraft design and be a PhD, but it doesn't have to go to that extent. But to start that process, you really have to think about like what drives you. What questions do you have that keep you up at night? Like, what are things about the world that just doesn't feel right, look right, seem right, that you yourself could see making an impact on? And sometimes that pairs well with like philanthropy work, or whether you're into a like nonprofit or a religious-based organization, however the meld, you can still find ways to like infuse that educational background. And so like me growing up, my mom made sure I was always in stuff, like always in sports, scouting, all these other things. And so those were like the stepping stones to make me have an appreciation for like higher education and just being curious. Because I would always look at the world and be like, why are things this way? And why can't we make improvements? And simply for me, it's to make improvements to make life better for my mom. I'm just like, okay, this world could be so much better if. And then, I'm always thinking in the back, like, yeah, mom, family, they'll all be able to benefit from that. And if you take the time to like really think about where you want to be, Like that first step is like, okay, where do I fit in the world? And what about my personality, my skill set, my demeanor could be leveraged later on for like an advanced degree? And so for me, I have attention to detail. I love efficiencies. And so I'm just like, okay, I want to improve upon our current status quo to make it better. And so that's how I landed in aircraft design and optimization. Even at A&T, I did conceptual design with the Aero team, and it seemed like at every place in the process, things were lining up. And so that's when you know when you're following in your purpose, because even if you struggle or you have these challenges come up, you're still following the process. Like it's not supposed to be easy, but it's not going to be impossible.
I love that. Oh my goodness, I love that. So listeners, for those that's on the line, the motto that I had in college, and I used to say it like kind of off the cuff. I didn't have a full appreciation until later in life, but I had this whole motto of like anything is possible. And I just love what Brandon just said, because like it was one thing to say it, but it's another thing to live it. And what I want to say to the listeners on the line here is just like what Brandon just said. Like, if you don't have this drive, this desire, this passion, and you truly are going after it because you want to, not because your mom or dad told you, not because somebody said, hey, you would be great at this. You genuinely have a unique desire for yourself to say, no, this is what I see for my life. This is what I want to go after. It becomes a whole lot tougher to make it a reality. Because like he said, when things get tough and you keep going down that process, it's because you know what your end goal is. You know, like, hey, I believe this. I know I can do this. This is what I want to make an impact on the world. So it's a different level of intentionality that comes when you're desiring to make it happen, rather than if it's just like checking the box. Because you just heard him. He was saying that the doctorate is not a necessary thing for everybody. So some folks say, hey, after my bachelor's, I'm good. I'm not getting anything else. Some folks say, hey, I'm getting my master's because I have to get my master's, and that's that because I want to get a certain pay rate. Like, you got to know what that motivation is for you and make sure you're genuinely going after something that you have a true desire for, because otherwise it becomes this reality where you finish and it's like, oh man, was this worth it? And that's the worst feeling in the world, if you finish something and then you have this like second guessing that happens of, man, I don't know if I should have did that. That's never the path you want to go down. I want to ask this question to you, Brandon, too, because I think what you're saying is so powerful here. When you think about like loving what you do, or saying like, hey, this is something I'm absolutely going after, talk to me about what the opposite side of that looks like. Not even about your journey, but what happens when somebody's going after something that isn't for them, or they're going after something out of necessity rather than pursuing something that they're truly passionate about.
Absolutely, Reggie. And I had a front row seat to this happening, because in grad school you find out, you know, what people are made of, and that's not a bad thing, but it's like you find out that, oh, I don't have to get this degree that people are telling me I need to get. And so on the flip side, on the negative, when you find out that like, hey, I'm not going in the direction that I now believe I should be, how do I make that pivot? Like, that's hard, because you have to admit that what you're doing now is not what you need to be doing, right. Which we're all human. We hate saying I made a mistake or I didn't do the right thing, but we have to learn how to embrace it, because the sooner we like pivot, the faster we get to that positive outlook and that positive feeling, because you feel like you're making progress again. And that's natural. That happens. That happened to me. Even in my degree, because I thought I was going to go do a different topic and I was full head of steam in that direction. My advisor says, hey, this other topic will garner more attention. I think this has more value. And I was not happy with that assessment. And I was like, well, this is what I want. You know, I've been wanting this. This is really important to me. And he's like, I understand. Think about it and tell me what you want to do. And I really went home and thought about it. And I was like, Brandon, as much as you want to do this, this is not what you should be doing. And, you know, hearing that from other people is really helpful. A book that I found in my grad school experience, being a part of the Black Graduate Student Association, was Leaving the Ivory Tower. And that really gives you an idea of why people leave academia. And it's not always because of like performance. Like, most cases, people are leaving academia because academia is not fit to provide a space for them to be successful. and it takes a lot of moving parts. And so if you are trying to right the ship, take your time, think about where you're going, and if it's in the wrong direction, that's fine. Accept it. Take the time to be in that emotion. That's something that I always try to do. It's like, okay, if I'm going to be here, let me at least feel it. And then once I felt it, I'm going to let it go. Mm-hmm. And so once you let it go, you're going to be like, okay, let's get back on track.
Yeah, man. I couldn't agree more. So I love how you saw a need and you wanted to go fill the need. And I think that's another thing that can differentiate passion versus checking the box. What I want to talk about, though, now is imposter syndrome. You know this better than any of when you're pursuing a degree or you're pursuing and you're in a room, or there could be times where we're the only and we're working through things and natural challenges. I think everybody has that time and that experience. It doesn't matter if you're a woman, you're a man, no matter what race you are. Talk to me about imposter syndrome. How do you overcome that, especially when you feel like you're the only? And that could be in a whole bunch of different facets.
Yeah, so when you're the only person, all eyes are on you, and you feel it. It's like gravity. It's like the weight of it. It's just, sometimes it can be overwhelming. But then you have to remember why you're there, and you have to remember that as much credit as the other people get for being in that room, you're also in that room. And that's a hard thing to like keep in mind on the fly, because people will make you feel by like, oh, how did you get here? Or, what school did you go to? So all these sound harmless, but really they're poking at your credibility, and you have to find ways to flip it and be like, oh, well, so-and-so insert senior officer asked me to be here for my opinion. They're like, oh, well, why'd they ask you? And then they're on their heels because they're like, oh, well, this person is like confident I'm not going to be able to get them. And so that takes time. It takes talking to people and getting to know how you interact in that space. Because if you're not able to build a community, it's going to be really hard to exist in that professional community. And sometimes that community is not going to look like you. And, A&T was great. It's a funny story. I almost didn't go to A&T. It was a family friend that was like, hey, Brandon, I think you should really think about A&T because it's like culturally it could help you. Mm-hmm. And that's how I left it in, because I was on my way to University of Maryland, College Park. That's where all my friends were. And so like A&T really helps in establishing your base, because they tell you from the jump, this is a one-of-a-kind place. Like, this is probably the only time you'll get to see where in every facet of your education, you see a person that looks like you. Mm-hmm. But when you go out into the world, that's when things start to change. My K through 12 was like the world. Like, I was always one of one. So you learn quickly how to adapt. And so because I went through that as like a middle school, high school student, I was able to like mentor students once they got to these PWIs to be able to be themselves in a place where they are literally the only Black person or person of color in the space. So having imposter syndrome it's hard, but I do think it's something that we can strengthen as we go.
Yeah. Wow. That's powerful. I got to let that breathe for a second. That's so powerful. Somebody definitely needs to hear that. A concept that I think a lot of us hear, no matter if we're in school or at work, people talk about being yourself, bringing your full self. I want to talk about your best self. How did Brandon find his best self, especially with those low points, especially with those challenges? Like when you think about now, you're Dr. Sales, you know what it took to make that happen, right? How do you get to be your best self, especially for somebody that's trying to go after their purpose?
Mm-hmm. So that took so much time. And it's funny that you say that, because I'm always striving for that best version. Even times when I'm not, I can acknowledge, right now I'm like, this is not my normal, like this is a new normal, but I can reestablish myself. I can make the best out of it, but I know I can strive for better. And so being able to like have that mindset is a gift, because you can always find a foundation in yourself. And it took being on internships. So I think I was my best self when I was interning for Boeing over the summer. because it would be a time where I was away from campus. I felt like I didn't have the weight of an assignment, the weight of a project on me. I could just literally be in my element that I've been training in school to do. And in that, I was like, man, I feel like I want to go surf. I want to go do this. I want to try everything. And I'm almost like a different person. And because I got a glimpse on what that person was, it's like a mold. And I was like, okay, to get back to that, I need to grow emotionally in this way. To get back to that, I need to make sure physically, like, I'm up to par, like fitness and all these other things. And I keep those in mind, and it really just starts putting together a playbook and a blueprint. It's like, okay, if I do these things, I get this outcome, and I feel so much better. So the best version of me is still out there, but it literally takes like an experience outside of your comfort zone. So if I were to tell your viewers anything, like, go somewhere that you've never been or experience something that you're kind of on the fence about, because I think that would be the place where you find out who you truly are, because you don't have any security blankets, as they call, to catch you if, like, let's say you need assistance, but that's when you'll find like who you truly are.
Man, wow. I'm loving this. Brandon. So I've been building up to this on purpose and been really intentional with the questions for those that's listening. And I promise we're getting ready to get to some meat and potatoes of life here. So please listen. If you haven't been really tapping in, I encourage you to rewind and press play and listen to this, because this is going to be really important to hear. So I'm going to read a scripture, and then we're going to talk about some pretty deep stuff here when we think about life. And Brandon is definitely one I know will not hold back on that, because he's real passionate about making sure we understand our why. So I'm going to read Jeremiah 29:11, and it says from the New International Version, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." So Brandon, what I'm trying to get at now is, he knows the plans for us, but we don't always know the plans. And just like you said, we don't have a full appreciation sometimes of the body of work and what it takes to get to be that best self, what it takes to achieve that purpose. And just for the listeners, sometimes if we knew exactly what it was that we were called to do or what we would have to do, and we knew what it took, some of us would run away or be really afraid to open that door. I want to talk about warfare, Brandon. I want to talk about fighting for what you believe in, fighting for what you think you're called for. So like the question or the thought that I would love to hear your perspective on is, when we think about our why, when we think about our heartbeat and why we're here, and you said for you it's a lot of different things in the values, from a family perspective, from the impact you wanted to have on the world, to the thing you knew that you could bring, and you found that at an early age. What would you say to somebody that doesn't know what their why is, that like is confused, like they feel like, oh, I'm not here for a reason, and what I'm doing doesn't matter, and I just need to go get a paycheck so I can live? Like, what would you say to somebody that just feels like they're just roaming right now?
Yeah, so get around people that you trust, because most likely they'll say something off the cuff. It's like, you know what, that seems to be your thing. You should look at that. Like you said earlier, I take pride in like having family around, and I am guilty of like running away from my purpose, and prophesize on my life and other things like that. And so, like, being able to come back through and find out that like I may not need to explicitly do what someone says prophetically, but I can do it in the same vein, because like making that impact is still the same. Mm-hmm. And so even if that why that you find is in your friends, talking with them, talking with community group members, talking with kids, like kids will say anything and they'll tell you the truth. And so sometimes they'll be like, you know what, you're really good at that, and that could be so simple, and you'll be like, yeah, I am. And that could really start the domino, because all you're trying to do is have these thoughts where you're like, okay, I'm really passionate about this. I'm actually really good at doing these type of things. Is there something that I can meld into a career or something along those lines? Everything doesn't have to be a moneymaker, and that's also something that's hard to take in, because we're in a society where money talks and we need money to do basic things. And so everyone's like, okay, if I do this, will this profit me in some way. It's like, well, sometimes what you need to do is not profitable. Like, it's something that you need to do may be like valuable in other ways. And so being able to like find a community where you can pour in, but also have them pour into you what you're here for. And it just comes down to figuring out like who you can talk to and who you trust. That's really what I would tell them.
Man, that is so powerful. And I'm going to build upon that the best I can, listeners, because what Brandon just said, I want to double click on. Who is around you determines who you are. And I would say it's really important to vet if you got the right people, because sometimes people in your life are not truly about you and about your well-being and helping you to get to where you need to be. Some folks want to be crab in the barrels and bring you down with them. So you got to really evaluate who your top 3 to 5 people are in your circle that's feeding you X, Y, or Z. And I think the other thing that I would say is get you a Brandon in your life. Get you somebody in your life that can challenge you. I'm just being real. Like, I think about now the circle that's around me and the circle that's changing and the difference that's starting to happen in Reggie. When I think about Reggie in his 30s now, when it comes to terms of Reggie in his 20s, right? So what I think is important is who is telling you what and what do you believe? Who are you? That's the question you got to really understand. Who are you and who do you think you are? And then who do you want to be? Because sometimes we feel because I'm out of shape or I'm this, I'm that you have to stay there. You don't have to stay there. No. We are a product of our future is determined by what we do today. Who do you want to be? And then how do you start taking the steps to get there? And then the other piece is if you don't have somebody that's seeing you the value that you bring or for what you're worth, you need to start changing those environments. Because I'm going to tell you all transparently, there was times where Brandon was saying things to me when I was in college where I was doubting myself, doubting myself. And he would say different things. And I was like, oh man, maybe I am better than I think. And there was other people saying things too. And the next thing you knew, when I got to my senior year in college, the things Brandon was telling me in my freshman and sophomore year, I was walking in my senior year. When I say walking in, I mean I would walk through McNair Hall and I knew everybody. And we had hundreds of people. I could have conversations with everybody in the McNair Hall of who they were, what they were. And it was like this moment, this culmination moment of me of, man, there's something more to this. Like there's a reason why. Like they used to call industrial and systems engineers imaginary engineers. And that wasn't the case for Reggie White, because Reggie White knew the work he was doing and the things he was about. So I'm saying that to say, who are you? And that's the question you got to ask for yourself and understand. So Brandon, we're going to dive a little deeper too, because I love what you're saying.
Let's go.
I want to talk about when you think about your life purpose and how you got to that culmination moment of this is what I was born to do, or this is what I'm setting out to do. Talk me through that journey for somebody that may feel their time is past. Like, oh, I'm in my 30s now. Oh, I'm in my 40s now. My time's done. I should have been working through this at 20. I should have been working through this. I should have went to school for this degree. How do we change that mindset when we feel like our time's past?
Absolutely. And so I love the fact that I am a kid at heart and I will remain that way. And so having that mindset really helps you have that small naivete that like time is always on our side. Like you could be in your 20s, in your 30s, in your 40s. You could still do it. There are even examples if you want to go to like celebrities, like where they don't really become relevant until their 40s or 50s. Mm-hmm. And we're just like, oh, so like sometimes life has to happen for you to get that aha moment. Like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is how I'm supposed to do it. Or you get around, those good amount of people, they're saying, hey, these are the steps you need to do. And sometimes you don't have access to that growing up. Like depending on, how your childhood is, you may not have had the opportunity to. So I wouldn't fault anyone's self for that. Like that's not something in your control. And so really you want to, if you're in control now, then you should start taking the steps to say, hey, okay, I see this. I want to start doing this. Let me start doing a small piece. You don't have to do everything all at once. That's where we fall because we're trying to make that pivot so fast that we end up overextending and then things don't work out how they should. And then we find out like, oh, well, maybe things aren't working out because that's not what I'm supposed to do, which is the wrong thing to think. Like there was even a time where, short story, I was on my way for a conference visit at Purdue. Like I've never been, this was my first welcome. And I had to drive from A&T to Indiana, where Purdue was. And on the road, I got stopped by a police officer because I was flying. I got booked. and they issued me like some class or whatnot. And I'm like, it's 4 a.m. I'm in Virginia on 83 or 82, and I'm just like, maybe this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing, because something bad happened.
Yeah.
And I literally sat in my car for like a half hour. Like, do I really need to go to Purdue? No, this must be a sign. And then I sat there and I was just like, Brandon, you weren't doing something you were supposed to do. Keep going. So sometimes we have to sit there and accept that, we may not have made decisions that are in our best interest all the time. And that happens, we're all human. But we can get back on track. And so to your listeners, if you're in your early ages, I want to call it, because I still think we're young, definitely take that step. Definitely think about what you can be at this point and how you can strive for that better version of yourself.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I think sometimes we forget that our weakest moments can make us stronger. And then sometimes we got to be torn down so we can be built back up better than ever. And I also think the Brandon story, which is so powerful, we can decide who we are. And it's so crazy. This week I've been having a bunch of conversations with random people, and they've been really kind of deciding to fight rather than to run. And sometimes in life, we have this decision where we have to stand and fight or we flee. And there is a time for fleeing. There's a time where you need to go back and regroup and heal. And sometimes there's times for mental therapy and counseling and different things. But I think it's important to know when it's fight or flight. And I love what Brandon's saying, because we can choose to get back up or we can choose to stay down. And I think it's important to choose to get back up. So, Brandon, I love where this is going. I want to talk about that mountaintop moment, even though I know in the moment it may not have felt that way. But talk to the listeners about that final presentation when you think about your doctorate, right? And now I know you have the actual paperwork in your hand. But talk to us about leading up to that, preparing for that, and then that kind of final presentation and what that weight probably either felt like or lifted when you kind of got through that.
Oh, it was a rough end of the journey, and a lot was happening because I had moved out of my place. And so I was staying with a friend, and, thank God for friends, because I personally thought that I was going to be able to go home, write up my final papers, and do some revisions and come back to Lafayette, do the presentation. And a friend of mine was like, Brandon, that's a bad plan. Looked me dead in my eyes. And she was just like, yeah, you can crash with us and we'll be fine. And so I was... sleepless nights. I don't think I slept for more than a couple hours a night, because I'm just trying to polish and make everything right. Because to me, this is a culmination of your degree. You have to give a report for what you've done, what impacts, what contributions, where you stand out in the research. And I'm just like, I want to make sure that it's crystal clear, because I know for people that look like me, we're always given that microscope where did you really do something? And so all that weight is on top of you, where you're trying to put on for your people. And so during those times, I was just, one day at a time. I was like, okay, I literally lived my days in hours. I was like, okay, this hour I'm going to be on it here, I'm going to be on it there, and then I'm going to take a couple hours just to rest and walk around. So I probably had the worst habits ever, because my eating was off, fitness was off, everything was off. But I was like, okay, something that will be on is this presentation. And so when it finally got time for the presentation, I actually didn't sleep the entire night before. So I was giving my presentation having not slept the entire night. And my presentation started off well. I had some committee members that had a lot of questions, and so we were essentially going back and forth. And we were going for 2 hours, and there were people on the Zoom calls like, Brandon, are you okay? That there was one person that just kept asking questions. I was like, yeah, he's fine. It's one of my committee members. It's just making sure we're good.
Yeah.
And so to me, I was like, I'm ready for this, because even being, an Eagle Scout would go through this same board of review process for the end to become that. And so I already had in my mind that there was going to be one person that was going to be standing in my way. And I was like, not today. I got all the time in the world. We can talk. And it was such a relief the next day because I woke up and I was like, okay, I don't have to prove anything to anybody. And it shouldn't be like, okay, I got a PhD now, I don't have to prove. Like, really, we shouldn't have to prove, but we know the society we live in. And that felt so great. I think I slept for like 3 days. And then once I got myself together, after partying with some friends, because I even think, and then I slept. And then I woke up and I think I watched Black Panther because I was like, so there's an inside joke there with some of the black grads at Purdue where they call me T'Challa because of something we had, an event we had when the premiere came out. And so that's been like one of my nicknames in the group me. And so I was like, you know what? Yeah, let me watch that movie. And then I was slumped for like 2 days straight. So it felt great. It still feels great now, like thinking back on it. But I know it was a lot. And I don't know how I got through it because I wasn't sleeping. My family was like, yeah, I know you're doing it, but like, do you need anything? I'm just like, no, I'm good. Like, everything was short. And so apologies to them about that, but thinking back on it, I just don't understand. And all I can do is thank God.
Yeah. Wow. I wanna just highlight a few things really quick in case anybody missed it on the that's listening. I love what Brandon just said. He said you heard him say he didn't sleep. He went and was going back and forth for hours and hours, but he knew what was his. He knew the work he put in, and he also knew that nothing was going to stop him from what he knew he was born to do. And sometimes I think we forget that we're born for this. And what I mean by that is yeah, we may not understand what that looks like years down the road or who we can be, but sometimes there are some things, not even sometimes, there are things in this life that people cannot take from you, right? So these degrees that Brandon's got, can't nobody take that away from him. The integrity that he has, the man that he knows he is, can't nobody take that away from him. When you know what your identity is and who you are, nobody can take that from you. And that's exactly what you just heard Brandon say. Like, when he was going through those presentations, Brandon knew the research that he did. He knew the body of work and what he stood for. It didn't matter if somebody wanted to try to poke holes and take the credibility away or try to act like Brandon didn't put a certain work in. Just like you heard him say, he said, I have all day. Because he slept, he didn't sleep. He was up all day. So he knew what time it was. And when you're willing to fight for what you believe in and what you know is yours, it's a different dynamic. So big kudos to you, Brandon, because, again, you can choose to fight or you can choose to flee. And Brandon fought. And now he is Dr. Sales. It's awesome. It's awesome. So look, I think we're at a good place to get ready to wrap. So Brandon, I want to let you give some final thoughts to the listeners. I'll give some final thoughts, and we'll kind of wrap up season 2 here.
Hey, that's awesome. And yeah, thanks again, Reggie, for having me on. It feels so great to like be a part of this process for you. And, you know, for your listeners out there, definitely take the time to figure out who you are. Look in the mirror and figure out where you want to make some improvements. They don't always have to be physical. They don't always have to be mental or emotional. But if you know that there is a better version out there, strive for it. Like, it just takes one day at a time. And, you know, anything that this process has done for me, it showed me that it may get bad before it gets better, but it has to get better. And, you know, I encourage you to reach out to your friends. Some may say, like, man, I don't want to be emotional. I don't know what my friends will think. It's like, no, just like be in that moment. You're a human being. You need to express those things. Take the time to take care of yourself, and things could work out. And I definitely believe that. So take the time. When I met Reggie, he was definitely that guy. And I was telling him early on that he was that guy. And, you know, he did the work. He did the due diligence. And so now we're here. And, you know, I'm happy to be a part of that process, to see him before he became him. And, you know, I'm excited to see what he does down the line.
Wow. So, man, I love every bit of that. I'm going to read a scripture and then I'll tell you all my final thought because I think it's important to kind of capitulate here what we're talking. 1 Peter 2:9, New King James Version. It says, but you're a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. I'm going to read that last part one more time because I think it's really relevant and that's kind of related to my final thought. His own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of the darkness into his marvelous light. Yeah, you may walk through the valley of death, but you can fear no evil. We have to learn how to walk through those dark times. We have to learn who we know we are and whose we are. And we got to start looking at life in a different perspective. You are the author of your own story. It's not about Reggie trying to be Brandon. It's not about Brandon trying to be Reggie. It's about you being you and knowing that you are one step away when you start to walk in that valley, when you start to say that I'm a chosen generation, when you start to say there's a call on my life, that there's nothing impossible for me if I can believe in whose I am. And that's where this light, right? The light that we're walking through in that darkness is Christ. And I just want you to know, like, Brandon Sells' story is a perfect example of how you walk through that valley. And now he's starting to walk into that promise. And now he's starting to do great things. And there's even more greater things that's going to come. Brandon could write a book. Brandon could be doing a whole bunch of different things. Brandon could be 20 years down the road, be a professor that's leading through and talking to somebody about what it truly means to live their purpose and how that goes through not just academia, but just walking through your life. So you got to learn how to be the author of your own story. What do you want that chapter of your life to look like? And what do you want that ending to be? You get to decide that. And I think it's about taking that first step. We got to stop saying we got to rush to the destination. It starts with one step that turns into a mile, that turns into us getting to the destination. That's what I would end with. And I just am so excited because this is kind of like, this podcast has been like that first step for me. And there's other things that I've been thinking through that I am going to do. I'm not just going to say it, I'm going to do it. And I just hope somebody else can be motivated to say that this is my journey, this is my beginning. I'm going to take that first step and take that leap. And like you said, like Brandon was saying, get the friends around you that can help rally you and motivate you and excite you and celebrate you, because great things can come. But you have to make that decision for yourself. You can either stay where you are, or you can start taking the steps to start fighting. And again, there's a time and place for everything, but it's really important to say, you know what, there's a time where I got to stand and fight. So that's what I encourage whoever that is that's listening, stand and fight. And there's going to be times you'll get knocked in your butt, but you don't have to stay there. So that's where I would end. Brandon, thank you so much, man. I have been motivated from this conversation from you. I'm excited to see, you know, what comes up next for you, because I know you're going to be making a transition. But I really hope that everything you want in life, man, you get it and more. You deserve every bit of it, man.
Oh, I appreciate it. I'm living life like I'm telling a good story. So that's what I want. Yeah.
Well, look, listeners, Season 2 is a wrap. We've had a whole lot. We wanted to end. This episode was the same name of the series, Tie Passion to Purpose. Whatever that call is, whatever that purpose is that you feel you were born to do, if you ever need a reminder of why you're still here, you put your hand on your heart and you feel a heartbeat, that equals purpose. There's still work to be done. That's what I will end with. So thank you so much for those that's listened. I encourage you to share this with others. I encourage you to help share the story that you're going through and find ways to give back. It's not just about you. That's the other thing that I'll say. Somebody needs to hear your story so they can know it's possible, so they can be able to tell their story to somebody else. It's about reaching one, teaching one, and next thing you know, we got a whole community that has a different perspective on this thing called life. So with that, Season 2 is a wrap. Thank you all so much. Until next time, we'll have Season 3 coming out at some point in 2024. But I'm excited for the journey that we'll continue to take together. So with that, ask yourself this question: how can I empower somebody else right here, right now? Until next time, everybody, thanks again.